I need to tell you what happened on my farm in the summer of 2019. Not because I expect you to believe me. I understand if you don't. I wouldn't have believed me either back before that August night. But I'm telling you anyway, because what's in these Kentucky mountains needs to be known about, even if most folks will think I've lost my mind. My name is Logan Pritchard. I'm 34 years old, and I've worked the land in Harlan County all my life. The farm's been in my family for 4 generations. 200 acres of Appalachian foothills, about half of it cleared for pasture and crops. The rest dense forest that climbs up into the mountains. My great-grandfather cleared the original 40 acres with a mule and hand tools. My grandfather expanded it. My father added the main barn and the irrigation system. When he passed in 2015, he left it to me, and I've worked it every day since with my wife, Sarah. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not some city person who jumped at shadows in the woods. I'm not the type who believes in Bigfoot or UFOs or any of that nonsense. I grew up hearing the old-timers tell stories around campfires, tales about things in the mountains that walked on 2 legs but weren't men, about hunters who went into the deep hollows and came back different, if they came back at all. I always figured those stories were just Appalachian folklore, the kind of legends every rural place has to spook kids and entertain tourists. I believed in what I could see, touch, and measure. I believed in the smell of tobacco drying in the barn, that rich, earthy scent that means a successful harvest. I believed in the sound of my cattle lowing at dawn when they knew feeding time was coming. I believed in the weight of honest work, in the calluses on my hands, from mending fence and hauling hay bales. I believed in morning fog rolling across the pastures like a living thing, burning off when the sun got high enough to turn the dew into steam. My world was practical and predictable. Sarah and I had a routine that varied only with the seasons. We had 2 part-time farm hands, Billy Thompson and his son Mark, who helped with the heavy work. We ran 23 head of Angus cattle, kept 47 chickens for eggs and meat, and had 8 goats, because Sarah loved them despite how much trouble they were. We grew tobacco as our cash crop and kept a big vegetable garden. We paid our bills, went to church most Sundays, and lived the kind of quiet life that people in cities probably think is boring. I loved that life. I loved knowing what each day would bring. I loved that the biggest excitement was usually a calf being born or a surprise thunderstorm rolling through. I loved falling asleep to the sound of crickets and distant owls, with Sarah beside me and our dog Rex on the kitchen floor downstairs. That was who I was before August 15th, 2019. A practical man on a practical farm living a predictable life. I remember August 14th in detail, so sharp it hurts. It was the last normal evening of my life. The day had been hot and humid, typical for Kentucky in mid-August. The kind of heat that sits on you like a wet blanket and makes even the simplest chores exhausting. Sarah and I had spent most of the afternoon in the tobacco barn, checking on the crop we'd hung to dry 2 weeks earlier. The smell in there was thick and sweet, almost overpowering in the heat, but it was the smell of money, of a successful harvest that would keep us comfortable through the winter. By evening around 7 or so, the temperature had dropped just enough to make being outside bearable again. I did my usual rounds, checked the fence lines on the ATV, made sure the water troughs were full, counted heads to make sure none of the cattle had wandered into the woods. All 23 were accounted for, grazing peacefully in the main pasture. The goats were in their pen near the barn, doing what goats do, eating things they shouldn't, headbutting each other for entertainment. Around 9, I did my final check of the night. The sun had set, but there was still enough light to see by that purple twilight that makes everything look soft and peaceful. I walked through the barn, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and animal warmth, making sure the chickens had all roosted and the doors were secure. I could hear the cattle settling down in the pasture, making those low, contented sounds they make when they're comfortable and safe. Everything was calm. Everything was exactly as it should be. I remember sliding the big barn door shut, feeling its familiar weight and hearing the rumble of the wheels on the track. I remember checking the latch twice, like I always did. I remember standing in the yard for a moment, just looking around at my farm, my land, feeling that quiet satisfaction that comes from a good day's work done right. The humidity hung thick in the evening air, making everything feel close and warm. I could smell Sarah's cooking coming from the house. Pot roast, if I wasn't mistaken, with those potatoes she knew I loved. The wraparound porch light was on, making our white 2-story farmhouse glow welcoming in the growing darkness. Beyond the barn, the pastures stretched toward the tree line, about 200 yards of open grass before the forest took over. I walked back to the house, my boots heavy with the day's work. Rex met me at the door, tail wagging, and I scratched behind his ears before washing up. He was a good dog, a German Shepherd mix we'd had for 6 years. Smart, protective, but gentle with Sarah. He'd barked at every delivery truck and strange car that ever came down our long driveway, but he'd never shown fear of anything in his life. Sarah had the table set when I came in from cleaning up. We ate dinner talking about normal things, whether we needed to call the vet out to check on one of the cows that had seemed to be limping slightly, when Billy and Mark could come by next to help mend the fence along the north property line, or whether we'd have time to visit Sarah's sister in Lexington before harvest season got too intense. Normal conversation, normal concerns. The kind of evening we'd had hundreds of times before. After dinner, we watched some TV, I don't even remember what show, and headed up to bed around 11. It was too hot to close the windows, so we left them open with just the screens to keep the bugs out. I remember lying there in the darkness, listening to the night sounds that were as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. The crickets were singing their endless song. Somewhere in the distance, a screech owl called. I could hear the cattle occasionally shifting in the pasture, the creak of the barn settling, the soft rustle of leaves when a breeze managed to stir itself. Sarah fell asleep before I did. Her breathing went slow and steady beside me. I lay there for maybe 20 minutes, feeling that bone-deep tiredness that comes from physical work, the kind of exhaustion that usually meant I'd sleep like the dead. The last thing I remember thinking before I drifted off was that we needed rain. The forecast said there was a chance of storms over the weekend, and the tobacco would benefit from a good soaking. Just a farmer's thoughts. Normal worries. I had no idea that in less than 5 hours, my entire understanding of the world would be shattered. I had no idea that something had been watching the farm that evening, watching me do my rounds, watching the livestock settle in for the night, watching the lights go off in the house one by one. I had no idea that while I slept peacefully beside my wife, secure in my practical, predictable world, something was moving through the forest at the edge of my property. Something that had marked my farm for reasons I still don't fully understand. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. When I woke at 3:47 a.m., My life as I'd known it was already over. I just didn't know it yet. The world was still dark, still quiet. Sarah was still sleeping beside me. Everything looked exactly as it should, but the silence, God, the silence was wrong. I realized it slowly, coming up from deep sleep, with a confusion that made my thoughts sluggish. Something had woken me, but I couldn't identify what. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what felt off. Then it hit me. I couldn't hear anything. No crickets, no owls, no cattle sounds from the pasture. Nothing. Complete and total silence pressed against my ears like physical weight. In 34 years of living on this farm, I'd never experienced quiet like that. There's always sound in the country, insects, animals, wind in the trees, something. But right then, at 3:47 in the morning on August 15th, 2019, the world outside my window had gone absolutely impossibly silent. The red LED numbers of the alarm clock seemed too bright in the darkness. I watched them change to 3:48, then 3:49. My heart starting to beat faster for reasons I couldn't name. Sarah slept on, undisturbed, her breathing the only sound in the universe. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a storm was coming. Sometimes the pressures change. Before a big storm could make things go quiet. But when I looked toward the window, I could see stars through the screen. No clouds, no wind. The air felt still and heavy with humidity, but not the charged feeling that comes before thunder. Maybe a predator nearby had scared everything into silence. A coyote or a fox. But that didn't make sense either. A fox might quiet the chickens in the hen house, but it wouldn't silence the crickets across 200 acres. 10 minutes passed. The silence continued, thick and oppressive. My mouth had gone dry. I could feel sweat starting to form on my chest, despite the relatively cool night air coming through the window. Then I heard it, distant from the direction of the forest. A sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. It was something between a howl and a growl, but wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't define. Too deep. Too long. With a quality that didn't match any animal I'd ever heard. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then cut off abruptly. The silence came back, even heavier than before. I lay frozen in bed, my heart hammering now. Every instinct I had screaming that something was terribly wrong. In the kitchen downstairs, Rex should have been barking his head off. That's what he did. Any strange sound and he'd alert us immediately. But Rex was completely silent. That scared me more than anything else. I should have gotten up right then, should have gone downstairs to check on Rex, should have grabbed my shotgun and gone outside to investigate. That's what the man I was before would have done. The practical farmer who didn't believe in anything he couldn't explain. But I didn't move. I lay there frozen, listening to that oppressive silence. Every muscle in my body tense with a fear I couldn't rationalize. The fear was primal, the kind that lives in the oldest parts of our brains, the parts that remember when humans were prey. Sarah stirred beside me, rolling over but not waking. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could feel the sheets growing damp with cold sweat despite the warm night. The clock read 3:56 now. 9 minutes since that sound from the forest. 9 minutes of silence so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. I forced myself to move, slowly sitting up, the bed creaking beneath me. Through the window screen I could see the farmyard bathed in starlight, the barn's dark silhouette, The fence lines stretching toward the tree line, everything still and motionless like a photograph. Nothing moved out there, nothing at all. Then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard something else. A wet sound. Rhythmic, like something tearing. It came from the direction of the main pasture, beyond the barn where I couldn't see. My mouth had gone completely dry. I swung my legs out of bed, my bare feet touching the cool hardwood floor. The floorboard creaked as I stood, and I froze, listening. The tearing sound had stopped. I moved to the window, pressing close to the screen, straining to see into the darkness beyond the barn. My eyes had adjusted enough to make out the fence line, the pale shapes of... I stopped breathing. Where there should have been cattle, dark shapes lying down or standing in the pasture, as they did every night, there was nothing. The pasture looked empty. Maybe they'd moved to the far side, I told myself. Maybe they were just out of sight beyond the rise. But I'd been farming long enough to know the patterns of my herd. At least some of them should have been visible from this angle. The clock read 4:03. I stood at the window for another 10 minutes, watching, listening, my heart refusing to slow down. The silence continued. No crickets resumed their song. No cattle sounds drifted up from the pasture. At 4:13, I heard Rex whine, a soft, pitiful sound, completely unlike his usual confident bark. It came from downstairs, muffled by the kitchen door. "Logan?" Sarah's voice was thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," I said, and my voice sounded strange even to me. "Something's wrong. The animals are quiet, all of them." She sat up, immediately more alert. Sarah had grown up on a farm, too. She understood that wrong sounds or wrong silence meant trouble. "What kind of wrong?" "I'm not sure. I'm going to check on things." "It's not even 4:30. "I know." I pulled on jeans and a t-shirt in the darkness, shoved my feet into my work boots without bothering to tie them. Sarah got up too, wrapping her robe around herself, and followed me to the stairs. At the bottom, I could hear Rex behind the kitchen door, making sounds I'd never heard from him before. Not quite whining, not quite growling, just a continuous anxious noise in his throat. When I opened the door, he didn't come bounding out like usual. He was pressed against the far side of the kitchen near his bed, and when he saw me, he whined louder and actually backed up, his tail tucked as tight against his body. His eyes were wide, showing white around the edges. "Rex? Hey boy, what's wrong?" He wouldn't come to me, just stayed pressed against the wall, shaking. I'd had Rex since he was 8 weeks old. I'd seen him face down aggressive dogs, 3 times his size without flinching. Seen him charge at a black bear that had wandered too close to the property. I'd never seen him show fear like this. "Jesus," Sarah whispered from behind me, "what's got him so spooked?" "Stay here," I said. "Lock the door behind me. I'm going to check outside." "Logan." "Just stay here. Keep Rex inside. I'll be right back." I grabbed my shotgun from the rack by the front door, checked that it was loaded. The familiar weight of it steadied me slightly. I stepped out onto the porch, and the August night wrapped around me like something physical. The silence was even worse outside. No insect sounds at all. No rustling from the chicken coop. No lowing from the cattle. Just dead, heavy silence broken only by my own breathing and the creak of the porch boards under my boots. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust further, scanning the farmyard. Everything looked normal: barn, equipment shed, the gate to the main pasture. But normal appearance didn't match the crawling sensation on my skin, the certainty that something was very, very wrong. The eastern sky was just beginning to show the barest hint of light, that deep pre-dawn blue that comes before true sunrise. Enough light that I could make out shapes, but not details. I stepped off the porch, shotgun ready, and started toward the barn. That's when I smelled it. Faint at first, but growing stronger with each step. Copper, thick and sweet and overwhelming. Blood. My pace quickened despite the dread building in my chest. The smell got stronger. Then I rounded the corner of the barn and saw the fence. 3 posts were splintered. The middle one snapped completely in half about 4 feet up. The wire fencing was torn, not cut. Torn like something had gone through it with massive force. Pieces of wood and wire were scattered in the grass. Beyond the fence, in the growing light, I saw the first body. One of my Angus cows, at least pounds, lying 30 feet from the fence line. Even from a distance, I could see the dark stain spreading beneath it in the grass. I moved forward in a daze, my boots carrying me through the broken fence toward the body. As I got closer, the smell became almost unbearable. The cow lay on its side, and my stomach lurched. I turned away, hand over my mouth, forcing down the bile that rose in my throat. I'd butchered animals before. I'd dressed deer and hogs. I'd seen what predators did when they killed. This was nothing like that. The cow had been torn apart. There was no other word for it. Its rib cage was exposed, white bones gleaming in the dim light. Long, ragged gouges ran the length of its body so deep they'd reached organs. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was that hardly anything had been eaten. Whatever did this hadn't killed for food. It had killed for the sake of killing. My hands were shaking as I raised the shotgun, scanning the pasture. The light was growing stronger now, sunrise maybe 20 minutes away. And as my eyes adjusted, my heart plummeted. There were bodies everywhere, dark shapes scattered across the pasture like grotesque markers. I started walking, moving from one to the next in growing horror. Another cow, throat torn open. A third, lying in pieces. Actual pieces. Legs and head separated from the body with violence I couldn't comprehend. A fourth, a fifth. They were all dead. All 23 of them. The flies had found them already, gathering in buzzing clouds in the humid morning air. Blood had soaked into the grass, turning it dark and slick. My boots stuck slightly with each step, making wet sounds that would haunt me later. I'd moved maybe 50 yards into the pasture when I saw what was left of the goats. They'd been in their pen near the barn, enclosed by a 6-foot fence. The gate hung open, twisted on its hinges. Inside, scattered across the small space, were pieces of white wool matted with blood. 8 goats, all dead. The smallest of them, Sarah's favorite, was nothing but scraps. Whatever did this had torn through that fence, killed every goat in a frenzy, and moved on. The chickens. Oh God, the chickens. I ran to the coop, already knowing what I'd find. The door had been ripped off completely, lying 15 feet away in the grass. Inside, the carnage was even worse in the confined space. Feathers everywhere, blood on the walls, the roosting bars torn down, 47 chickens gone, not taken, not carried off, just slaughtered and left. I stumbled out of the coop, my shotgun hanging forgotten in my hands, and vomited in the grass. Everything came up: dinner, bile, the coffee I'd had before bed. I heaved until there was nothing left. Tears streaming down my face, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. No predator did this. A pack of wild dogs might kill a few animals before the rest scattered or defended themselves. A bear might take down one or two cattle. A mountain lion would kill one and drag it off to feed. But this was systematic slaughter. This was every animal we owned, killed in the space of, an hour? 2 hours? While Sarah and I slept soundly in our bed less than 200 yards away. While Rex cowered in the kitchen, too terrified to even bark. The sun was coming up now, proper dawn light spreading across the farm, and somehow that made it worse. In the darkness, my mind could have held on to some uncertainty, some possibility that I was mistaken about what I was seeing. But the morning sun was merciless, illuminating every detail of the slaughter. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, tried to call Sarah. My fingers wouldn't work properly. I had to try 3 times to pull up her number. "Logan?" Her voice was panicked. "What's happening? What?" "Call the sheriff," I managed. My voice sounded hollow, distant. "Call him right now. Tell him everything's dead. Every animal. Tell him to get here now." "What? Logan, what are you—" "Just call him," I shouted, then immediately regretted it. I'm sorry. Just please call. I'm okay. I'm coming back to the house soon. But call the sheriff first." I hung up before she could respond and forced myself to start documenting. Pulled up the camera on my phone and started taking pictures, moving mechanically from body to body. The police would need this. I would need this, because part of me was already trying to convince myself that this couldn't be real, that I was having some kind of breakdown. But the blood was real, the smell was real, the flies were real. I was behind the barn photographing the goat pen when I saw the prints. The ground near the water trough was muddy from a slow leak I'd been meaning to fix, and pressed into that mud clear as day was something that made me stop breathing. A footprint. Except calling it that didn't do it justice. It was canine-shaped, elongated with 4 toe pads and claw marks. But it was massive. Nearly 7 inches wide, which would make it maybe 10 inches long. The claw marks extended almost an inch beyond the toe pads, gouged deep into the mud. I'd seen dog prints, wolf prints, bear prints. This was like a dog print, but scaled up to a size that shouldn't exist. And there wasn't just one. There was a trail of them, pressed into the bloody mud, leading from the pasture toward the tree line. Without thinking, without considering whether it was safe or smart, I followed them. The prints were spaced far apart. Whatever made them had been running, covering maybe 6 feet between steps. They led past the barn through the equipment area toward the dense forest that bordered our property. Blood spattered the grass along the trail. One of the prints was so deep, it had left a perfect impression in a soft spot of ground, and I crouched down next to it, holding my phone up to capture the image. The scale was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The heel pad was too wide, the claw marks were too long. And there was something else. On a couple of the prints, where the ground was softest, I could see marks behind the main pad, like dew claws, except they were positioned wrong, too high and too far back, almost like I heard a sound from the forest, and my head snapped up. It was just wind, I told myself. Just branches moving. But there was no wind. I straightened slowly, raising my shotgun, my heart hammering again. The tree line was about 40 yards away now. The prints led straight toward it, disappearing into the shadows under the canopy. That's when I saw the goat. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing. One of the goats, a young doe, white with brown spots, was in a tree. Not at the base of it, not near it, in it. 15 feet up, wedged into the fork where two thick branches split from the main trunk of an old oak tree. I stood there staring upward, my brain trying and failing to make sense of it. The goat was dead, its neck bent at an unnatural angle, blood dripping slowly down the trunk. There was no way it had climbed up there. Goats could climb, sure, but not like that. Not into a tree with smooth bark and widely spaced branches. Something had put it there. Something had killed a 40-pound goat and thrown or carried it 15 feet up into a tree, wedging it into place like a grotesque ornament. Why? I was staring up at the impossible sight, my mind reeling when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. In the forest. Maybe 40 yards into the trees, where the shadows were still deep despite the rising sun. Something was there. Something huge and dark that moved between the trunks. I saw it for maybe 3 seconds, 4 at most. It was moving upright, standing on 2 legs like a man, but too tall, too broad. Then it dropped forward onto all 4s, and the shift in movement was so fluid and wrong that my entire body went cold. It vanished deeper into the forest, and I heard the crack of branches, the sound of something large moving fast through the undergrowth, getting further away. Then silence. I realized I was still holding the shotgun at my side, useless, unfired. I hadn't even thought to raise it. Hadn't even thought to defend myself. I just stood there frozen while something watched me, while something that had killed every animal on my farm stood in those trees and decided whether or not to come after me too. My legs finally remembered how to move. I backed away from the tree line, not turning my back on the forest. The shotgun now raised and ready, even though my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't have hit anything. I kept backing up until I reached the barn, then finally turned and ran toward the house. Sarah was on the porch, her face pale. "The sheriff's coming. Logan, what?" "Get inside," I managed. "Get inside now. Don't go near the barn. Don't go near the pasture. Stay in the house." "You're scaring me." "Good," I said. "We should be scared." Sheriff Tom Bradshaw arrived 40 minutes later with 2 deputies. By then the sun was fully up, and my farm had been transformed into something from a nightmare under the harsh morning light. The blood looked impossibly bright red. The bodies looked like props from a horror movie. The scattered white wool from the goats looked like snow in hell. I met them in the driveway, and I must have looked as bad as I felt, because Bradshaw's expression changed immediately from professional concern to alarm. "Logan, are you hurt? Is Sarah—" "We're fine," I said. "The animals aren't. Everything's dead, every goddamn thing." They spent the next 3 hours documenting everything, taking photos, measuring the prints, examining the bodies. I watched them work in a daze, sitting on the porch steps because my legs had stopped working properly. Sarah brought me water that I couldn't drink and sat beside me, her hand in mine, neither of us talking. The deputies were young, professional, thorough. They photographed the prints and made plaster casts of the best ones. They examined the fence damage. They walked the entire perimeter. I heard one of them on his radio, reporting to someone about the scope of the scene, his voice carefully controlled but with an edge of disbelief. Around noon, after the deputies had loaded up their equipment and headed back toward town, Sheriff Bradshaw came over to where Sarah and I were still sitting on the porch. "Can we talk inside?" he asked quietly. In the kitchen, Bradshaw refused the coffee Sarah offered. He stood with his back to the counter his uniform hat in his hands, and for a long moment he just looked at us. He was in his mid-50s, had been sheriff for almost 20 years. I'd known him my whole life. "Pack of feral dogs?" I asked, though I already knew that wasn't his answer. "Bear?" "Logan." He stopped, started again. "No, that's not what did this." "Then what?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, "This is the third farm in Harlan County in 2 years. Same pattern. Every animal killed, most not eaten. Massive prints. Violence that doesn't match any known predator." The words hit me like cold water. "Third? The Hendersons' fall of 2017. Lost their entire herd. 15 cattle, a dozen pigs, and the Morrison place, spring of last year. They had sheep. 43 of them, killed in one night. Why didn't anyone?" "They left," Bradshaw said quietly. "Both families. Packed up within a month and moved away. Neither one would talk about what happened. Hell, Morrison wouldn't even file a detailed report. Just said it was a predator attack and that was it." Sarah's hand found mine again. "What are you saying, Tom?" The sheriff looked at us for a long moment, his weathered face troubled. Then he said, "My grandfather used to tell stories about something in these mountains. Something that walks on 2 legs but isn't a man. The old Cherokee people who lived here first, they had stories about it too. A creature that's part man, part wolf, part something else. Something territorial and intelligent and mean." "That's folklore," I said, but my voice shook. "That's just—" "I know what I sound like," Bradshaw interrupted. "Believe me, I know. But I've seen the photos from the Henderson place and Morrison's. I've seen the prints. They're identical to what's in your pasture right now, and I saw something else." He stopped, seeming to reconsider. "What?" I pressed. "Morrison, before he moved, he told me something off the record. Said the night it happened, he saw it. Standing at his tree line, watching the house. Said it was 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Walked on 2 legs like a man. Had a head like a wolf, but wrong. Eyes that reflected his flashlight. And he said—" Bradshaw's voice dropped. "He said it smiled at him, not like an animal. Like something that knew exactly what it was doing and wanted him to know it too. The kitchen felt too small suddenly. Too warm. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, Rex shifting nervously in his bed in the corner. "What do we do?" Sarah asked. "If this thing comes back—" "It won't," Bradshaw said, but he didn't sound certain. Both previous farms, it was a single incident. Hit them once and moved on. I can't explain why, but that's the pattern." "That's not good enough," I said. "I know." His calloused hand landed on my shoulder, heavy and warm. "I'll have deputies patrol past here every night for the next month, but Logan, Sarah, you need to think hard about whether you want to stay. I'm not saying that lightly, but whatever did this—" He trailed off, then finished. "It's still out there." After he left, I sat at my computer in the little office off the kitchen, staring at the screen. Sarah was upstairs lying down, though I knew she wasn't sleeping. Rex had finally stopped trembling but still wouldn't leave the kitchen. I typed Kentucky Dogman into the search bar and went down a rabbit hole that lasted until well after dark. There were dozens of sightings, maybe hundreds across the state, going back decades. Reports from Harlan County, Knox County, Bell County, some within 20 miles of my farm. Descriptions that varied in details but aligned in the basics. Bipedal, 7 to 8 feet tall, canine head, covered in fur, incredibly fast and strong. Intelligent eyes. Aggressive behavior. I found forums where people shared their encounters. Hunters who'd seen something watching them from tree lines. Campers who'd heard vocalizations that weren't quite wolf, weren't quite human. Farmers who'd lost livestock. The stories went back years, decades, generations. I found a report from 1983, just 12 miles from my farm. A tobacco farmer named Eugene Hicks reported losing 18 cattle in a single night. The local paper had run a story calling it a mystery predator. Hicks had told the reporter he'd seen it, something that shouldn't exist, but wouldn't provide details. He'd sold his farm 6 months later. I found a scanned newspaper clipping from 1952. A logging crew in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky had refused to work after several men reported seeing a wolf man near their camp. The article treated it as superstitious nonsense. I found academic papers discussing the folklore of cryptids in Appalachia. One anthropologist theorized that Dogman sightings were a continuation of indigenous legends about skinwalkers and shapeshifters, stories that predated European settlement. I found grainy photos, shaky videos, audio recordings of howls that made my skin crawl even through tinny computer speakers. And I found my own reflection in the darkened window behind my computer screen, eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear, and realized I believed it. All of it. The sun had set hours ago. The farmyard beyond the window was dark, and somewhere out there, in the vast forests that covered these ancient mountains, something that shouldn't exist was real. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey and sat in the darkness, listening to Sarah crying softly in our bedroom upstairs, and tried to figure out what the hell we were going to do next. The first 2 nights after the slaughter, I didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bodies scattered across my pasture, saw that goat wedged impossibly high in the tree, saw that dark shape moving through the forest shadows. Sarah tried to get me to rest, tried to convince me that whatever it was had moved on like Sheriff Bradshaw said it would, but I couldn't trust that. Couldn't trust anything anymore except the weight of the rifle in my hands and the spotlight I kept charged and ready. By the 3rd night, exhaustion had settled into my bones like a sickness, but fear kept me wired, kept me alert. I'd set myself up in the barn loft with a good view of the pastures and the tree line beyond. The loft smelled like it always had. Musty hay and old wood and the lingering scent of livestock that was gone now, that would never be there again. But those familiar smells couldn't comfort me anymore. They just reminded me of everything I'd lost. I'd dragged an old chair up there and positioned it near the loft door, which I'd left open to give me a clear sight line. My deer rifle lay across my lap, loaded and ready. The spotlight sat on a hay bale beside me, its beam pointed toward the floor, but ready to swing up at a moment's notice. Rex was in the house with Sarah. I'd tried to bring him to the barn for company, but he'd refused, planted his feet, and pulled back against his leash until I gave up. Whatever he'd sensed that night had broken something in him. He wouldn't go more than 10 feet from the house now. The August night pressed close and humid around me. I could hear crickets again. They'd come back the night after the slaughter, their song resuming like nothing had happened, like my entire world hadn't been torn apart. Somewhere in the distance, a screech owl called. Normal sounds, but I couldn't trust normal anymore. Around a.m., I heard Rex start barking from the house. Not his usual alert bark when a car came down the driveway or a raccoon got into the trash. This was frantic, continuous, high-pitched with terror. The same sounds he'd made that morning when I'd found the slaughter. My heart kicked into overdrive. I grabbed the spotlight with shaking hands, my exhaustion vanishing in a flood of adrenaline. The beam lanced out across the empty pasture, cutting through the darkness like a knife. I swept it slowly left to right, my other hand tight on the rifle. The pasture was empty. The fence line showed dark against the grass. Beyond it, the forest. The spotlight caught something at the tree line, maybe 80 yards away, standing in the open just before the forest began. My breath stopped. It was standing upright, fully upright, like a man stands. But it was no man. Even from that distance, I could see it was massive. 7 feet tall at least, maybe 8. Its body was covered in dark hair, matted and rough-looking. The spotlight reflected off that fur in a way that made my skin crawl, showing the powerful muscle beneath. But it was the head that made my mind try to reject what I was seeing. Wolf-like, but wrong. The snout was too long, the proportions off in a way I couldn't define. The ears were pointed and tall, and as I held the spotlight on it, they swiveled toward me with an articulation that was too precise, too controlled. It wasn't running. It wasn't hiding from the light. It was just standing there, watching. Its arms, not front legs, but arms, hung at its sides in a posture that was disturbingly human. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, the chest deep and powerful. And then I saw its eyes. They reflected the spotlight beam like mirrors, glowing bright green in the darkness. But there was something in that gaze, even from 80 yards away, something aware, something that knew exactly what it was doing. My hands were shaking so badly the spotlight beam trembled. I tried to steady it, tried to get a better look, my mind still trying to find some rational explanation. A bear standing up, a person in a costume, anything but what I was actually seeing. With my left hand, I slowly raised the rifle, settling the stock against my shoulder. My movements felt slow, underwater. I found the creature in my scope, and the magnification made it even worse. I could see the texture of its fur, the way its chest expanded and contracted with each breath. I could see the length of its snout, the teeth visible even with its mouth closed. I could see how its hands, they were hands, fingers visible even if they ended in dark claws, hung relaxed at its sides. I chambered around. The sound was crisp and clear in the quiet night, the metallic click-clack carrying across the empty pasture. The thing's ears swiveled toward me, then its head turned. Slowly, deliberately, it turned its massive head toward the barn, toward the loft, toward me. Our eyes met through the scope, and everything in me went cold. I've hunted my entire life. I've looked through a scope, at deer, at wild hogs, at coyotes. I've seen the blank animal stare of prey and predator alike. This wasn't that. This was intelligence looking back at me. This was something that knew I was there, knew I was armed, and wasn't afraid. It wasn't just looking at me. It was assessing me, making a decision. The primal terror that hit me then was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It bypassed my rational mind completely, went straight to the oldest parts of my brain, the parts that remembered when humans weren't at the top of the food chain. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, hide, make myself small and invisible. My finger was on the trigger. I had a clear shot. I was a good marksman. I could put that round right in its chest from this distance, but I couldn't pull the trigger, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We stayed locked like that for maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10. Time felt elastic, stretching out impossibly. Then it dropped. One moment it was standing upright, and the next it had dropped forward onto all fours, with a fluidity that defied physics. On 4 legs, it looked even more massive, built like a wolf the size of a bear. And then it was moving, vanishing into the forest in seconds with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. The spotlight beam showed only empty space where it had stood. The forest had swallowed it completely. I stayed frozen in position for another full minute, my heart hammering so hard it hurt, cold sweat running down my spine despite the August heat. My finger was still on the trigger, the rifle still aimed at that empty space. The spotlight was still trembling in my other hand. Rex had stopped barking. The crickets had gone silent again. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the blood pounding in my ears. When I finally lowered the rifle, my arms were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I played the spotlight across the tree line one more time, but there was nothing. Just darkness and trees and the knowledge that something impossible had just been watching my house, watching me deciding what to do next. I didn't leave the barn until sunrise. Couldn't make myself climb down that ladder, cross that open ground to the house. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every sound made me jump. By the time the sun came up and Sarah appeared on the porch, calling for me, I'd aged a decade. I saw it, I told her when I finally made it back to the house. I saw it clear, Sarah. It was watching us. She wrapped her arms around me, and I could feel her shaking. Or maybe I was the one shaking. Maybe we both were. The next afternoon, I drove into town to buy motion sensor cameras and floodlights. If this thing was going to keep coming back, I wanted to document it, wanted proof, wanted something that would make Sheriff Bradshaw take this seriously, make someone believe that we weren't safe here. I was in the hardware store, my truck bed already loaded with equipment, when my phone rang. Sarah's number. I answered it and immediately knew something was wrong. I could hear her breathing, fast and panicked. Logan. Her voice was barely a whisper. Logan, you need to come home. What's wrong? Are you hurt? I saw it. Jesus Christ, Logan, I saw it. It was here in broad daylight. It was right here in the yard. I was running for my truck before she finished the sentence. Lock the doors. Get Rex and lock yourselves in the bedroom. I'm coming right now. The drive back took 15 minutes, but felt like hours. I kept her on the phone the whole way, listening to her breathe, telling her it was going to be okay, even though I had no idea if that was true. When I pulled into the driveway, she was watching from the bedroom window. I grabbed the pistol from my glove box and went in through the front door, clearing the first floor before heading upstairs. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, Rex pressed against her legs. Her face was bone white, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. Tell me what happened. I was hanging laundry, she said, her voice still shaky. Out back by the clothesline, and I heard something breathing. Heavy breathing, like something big. On the other side of the house. I felt my stomach drop. What did you do? I should have run inside. I know I should have. But I had to look. I had to see. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. It was standing at the edge of the yard. By the tool shed, maybe 40 feet away. Jesus, Sarah? It was just standing there watching me, and Logan, I could see it. Really see it. The matted fur, dark brown, almost black. The arms. It had arms like a person but covered in hair, with these thick muscles. The hands had fingers and claws, and its face. She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Its face was wolf-like, but wrong. The snout was too long, the jaw too powerful. But the eyes, Logan. The eyes were too human. They were staring right at me, and I could see it thinking. I could see intelligence there. It wasn't just an animal. It knew I was there. It knew I was scared. How long did it? Almost a minute. Just standing there, staring at me. I couldn't move. Couldn't scream. I just stood there holding the laundry basket like an idiot. Then it turned, just turned like it was done looking, and walked back toward the forest. On two legs, walking like a person walks. And then it was gone. I went outside while Sarah stayed in the bedroom with Rex. Found the tool shed and circled it slowly, my pistol ready even though I knew the thing was long gone. The claw marks were on the back wall, the side facing the forest. 4 parallel gouges dug deep into the old wood, fresh splinters still pale and exposed. I reached up to touch them. They started about 6 feet off the ground and ran down maybe 8 inches, carved into the solid wood like it was butter. Each gouge was nearly half an inch deep. The musky smell still lingered in the air around the shed, like wet dog but wilder, stronger, mixed with something else I couldn't identify, something that made my hindbrain scream danger. I took photos of the marks, measured them, documented everything. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I'd moved past fear into something else, something colder and more focused. That night, we packed. Not everything. We weren't ready to abandon the farm permanently, but enough for a few weeks. Clothes, important documents, Rex's food and bowls. Sarah's sister Karen lived in Lexington, had been begging us to visit. We'd stay there, I told Sarah. Give this thing time to move on, let things settle down. But before we left, I was going to set up those cameras. I was going to get proof of what was stalking us, and then I was going to find someone who could help us deal with it, because Sheriff Bradshaw's advice to just wait it out wasn't enough. Not anymore. Not after it had come to our yard in broad daylight and marked our property like it owned the place. We spent the late afternoon setting up the equipment. 4 trail cameras positioned around the property, 2 facing the tree line, 1 covering the yard, 1 aimed at the barn. 2 motion sensor floodlights that would illuminate the yard between the house and barn like a baseball field. We'll leave first thing in the morning, I told Sarah as we finished, soon as it's light. But we didn't make it that long. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a sound like daylight breaking. Every floodlight outside had activated simultaneously, turning our bedroom bright as noon through the curtains. Sarah sat up beside me with a gasp. I grabbed my rifle from where I'd propped it against the nightstand and moved to the window, pulled back the curtain and looked out. It was standing in the middle of the yard, right out in the open, maybe 50 feet from the house, caught in the harsh white glare of the floodlights. And God help me. This was the first time I'd seen it in full illumination, seen every detail with perfect clarity. It was massive, 7.5 feet tall at least, maybe more. 400 pounds of muscle and bone and dark fur, standing fully upright on 2 legs, with a posture that was obscenely human. The fur was dark brown, almost black, matted and thick. The shoulders were impossibly wide, the chest deep and powerful. Arms hung at its sides, and I could see the hands, 5 fingers too long, tipped with black claws that curved downward. But it was the head that made my blood run cold. Wolf-like, yes, but the snout was elongated beyond any wolf's proportions. The ears were tall and pointed, swiveling independently, and the face, it had expressions, muscles beneath the fur that created something like human emotion. Right now, that expression was focused, intense, predatory. It was staring directly at our bedroom window, directly at me. I raised the rifle, my hands surprisingly steady now. This was it. This was the moment. I switched on the rifle light, adding another beam to the floodlights already illuminating it. The creature didn't flee. Instead, its lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing teeth that were 3 inches long. A sound came from it, not quite a growl, not quite anything I could name, that I could hear even through the closed window. Then it started walking toward the house, not rushing, not charging, just walking with slow, deliberate steps on 2 legs, its eyes never leaving our window. "Logan!" Sarah's voice behind me was pure terror. I didn't hesitate. I opened the window with one hand, raised the rifle with the other, and fired. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, but I heard the bullet hit, a meaty thunk that told me I'd struck center mass. The creature flinched, stumbled slightly, its hand going to its left shoulder where I'd aimed. Then it opened its mouth and screamed. The sound was like nothing in nature. It started as a howl but rose and twisted into something higher, almost human, before dropping into a roar that vibrated in my chest. The windows rattled with it. Rex started howling downstairs. Sarah cried out behind me, and the creature didn't run. Instead, it got more aggressive. It charged the house. I fired again, working the bolt as fast as I could, firing a 3rd time. One shot went wide, but I saw the second one hit, saw it stumble. But it kept coming, covering the distance with horrifying speed. I fired a 4th shot through the window, glass shattering, falling in glittering pieces, just as it reached the porch. This time it stopped, maybe 10 feet from the house, and we were close enough that I could see its eyes clearly. Green and bright and full of an intelligence that made me want to scream. It took a step back, then another. But not in fear. I could see that clearly. This was calculated. This was a tactical retreat. It maintained eye contact with me the entire time, backing slowly across the yard, its lips still pulled back, showing those impossible teeth. Then it dropped to all 4s and vanished into the darkness beyond the floodlights, moving so fast it was just a blur of dark fur and muscle. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. "Did you kill it?" Sarah whispered. "I hit it. 3, maybe 4 times. But I don't think—" I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't admit that I'd put multiple rifle rounds into something and it had walked away. We heard it 15 minutes later. The heavy sound of something large moving around the perimeter of the house, testing, a scraping sound at the back door that made my blood freeze, claws on wood, the handle rattling. Then footsteps on the porch. Then silence. Then more footsteps on the other side of the house. It was circling us, testing every entry point. We dragged the dresser in front of the bedroom door. I kept the rifle aimed at the window while Sarah called 911, her voice shaking as she tried to explain to the dispatcher what was happening. I could hear the skepticism in the dispatcher's voice, even from across the room, but she promised to send someone. Around a.m., we heard it again, right outside our window. The sound of breathing, heavy and deliberate. Then a long, slow scrape of claws against the siding. Then a growl so deep, I felt it in my bones. "Our Father, who art in heaven," Sarah was praying beside me, her voice barely audible. "Hallowed be thy name." The breathing moved away, around to another window. testing, always testing, looking for weakness. A sheriff's deputy arrived around 1:30, lights flashing in our driveway. By then, the creature had gone silent. The deputy walked the perimeter with his flashlight, found nothing, and looked at me like I might be drunk or crazy or both when I tried to explain. He saw the broken window, the shell casings on our bedroom floor, but that was all. Probably scared it off when you fired, he said, trying to be reassuring. Whatever it was. But I'd seen its eyes. I knew it hadn't been scared. It had just decided to leave. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. Just sat in our barricaded bedroom, Rex between us, listening to every sound. Waiting for dawn like it was salvation. When the sun finally came up, I went outside to check the cameras. All 4 were destroyed. Torn down from their mounts and crushed. Plastic and circuit boards scattered in the grass. But one camera's SD card had survived, lying in the dirt near the barn. I took it inside and loaded it on my computer with shaking hands. Most of the files were corrupted, the data damaged. But 3 images had survived. 2 were blurry, something large and dark moving between frames. But the third was crystal clear. The creature's face filled the frame, so close it must have been inches from the camera when it triggered. Eyes reflecting green in the flash. Mouth open, showing those teeth. And in those eyes, in that impossible face, intelligence, awareness, and something that looked almost like satisfaction. I was still staring at that image when Sarah came in and saw it over my shoulder. She made a sound like all the air had left her body. "We're leaving," she said, "right now. Pack everything we can fit in the truck and we're going to Karen's. I don't care if we ever come back." I wanted to argue. Wanted to say this was our home, our land. 4 generations of my family had worked this soil. But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was, "Okay." We loaded the truck in daylight, moving fast, checking the tree line every few seconds. Rex jumped into the cab without being asked, pressing himself against Sarah's legs. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked in the rear-view mirror at the farm shrinking behind us. The white farmhouse, with its wraparound porch, the big red barn, the empty pastures where my cattle should have been grazing. And beyond it all, the forest, dark and dense and full of shadows where anything could hide. I saw it then, just for a second, standing at the tree line in broad daylight, watching us leave, tall and dark and utterly still. Then we rounded the bend in the driveway and it was gone, and I couldn't tell if I'd really seen it or if my exhausted mind had conjured it. Either way, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was in those woods, it had won, at least for now. We'd be back. This was still our land, our home. But we'd be different when we returned. Better prepared, better armed, with help somehow from somewhere. Because that thing in the woods, it wasn't done with us. I could feel it. This was just the beginning.